Welcome to you all and thank you so much for being part of this important conversation tonight. We're really fortunate to have writer Beth Macy with us to discuss her new book, Raising Lazarus. I'm pretty sure you all know Beth's name. Her book, Dope Sick, which was made into a Hulu miniseries of the same name, was filmed a good portion of it here in Clifton Forge. So Beth is here and is appreciative of everything that happened here with Dope Sick. We're also so glad to have the head honchos of Cardinal News with us tonight, Luann Rife and Dwayne Yancey. And if you don't know Cardinal News, log on and find your new Southwest and Southside Virginia news source. They're working miracles in our region. I know that Luann will officially introduce the panelists tonight, but personally I'd like to thank all of you for being here and being part of this important conversation. Thank you so much. I also want to make clear that this program is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the town of Clifton Forge. It was our town manager, Chuck Unrow, who made the rental of this beautiful theater possible. So please thank Chuck when you see him next. And I believe he's sitting in the back row, so on your way out, thank Chuck. So now please welcome Luann Rife, the Executive Director and Chief Development Officer for Cardinal News.
Good evening. This is just such a great crowd. I want to echo Joan in thanking the town for sponsoring this event and for having it at such a beautiful place. We wouldn't have been able to do it without their sponsorship or without Joan. She's just such a dynamo in getting everything going. A couple of housekeeping items. Blue Ridge PBS is recording this. The segment will be aired in a couple weeks and shared on Echo Broadcast and the YouTube channel. And if you haven't visited the Underground yet tonight, please do so after the program. Beth will be there signing some books, and the Alleghany Highlands Community Services will have material and handouts. So, sometimes when we come out before crowds, we like to say, who all has heard of Cardinal News? Well, that's a pretty good show of hands, and I hope that, and as we go out more in the public, we find more and more people are learning about us, and I hope that you will visit our website and sign up for our newsletters. For those who don't know too much about us, I hope you'd indulge me for a couple of minutes. We're an online news organization, and we serve Southwest and Southside Virginia, and we're a nonprofit, and so that means two things. One, gifts to us are tax deductible, and two, gifts to us are our only means of revenue. And when we started about 16 months ago, we had an editor and two reporters, and this idea that we would tell the untold political, economic, and cultural stories so that our communities had a voice. And we quickly realized how great the need was for what we do. The work of our friend Beth Macy is a prime example. Dwayne and I have known Beth for a very long time, and we've worked alongside her at the Roanoke Times. And when Beth began more than a decade ago writing about opioids, it was a topic that no one really wanted to talk about. And as a reporter, she began telling the story of opioid addiction and heroin use, and she did it through the young people living in Roanoke's most affluent neighborhoods. And she talked about the deadly consequences. And no one at that time dared to talk about substance abuse in their families. Her work pried open a tiny crack in a door that misplaced shame had slammed shut. So think about that. A decade ago, you probably wouldn't have come out on a Monday night to be part of an open discussion about what we as families, neighbors, and employers can do to mitigate the harm caused by substance use. And that's one of the things journalists do. They barge through those shuttered doors and bring to light topics powerful people would prefer to remain hidden, and that others are too ashamed or too fearful to talk about. But here's the other part of the journalism story. When Beth was at the Roanoke Times, there were 30 or more than 30 other reporters working with her in that newsroom. Today, there may be 10. And because they are stretched so thin, they cannot take on the demanding challenges of in-depth reporting. So we created Cardinal News because of that. We have stepped in to fill the void, to tell the meaningful stories. And in our short existence, we have learned the need is so great for local journalism. We're expanding. We now have 2 editors and 6 reporting positions funded. And we plan to hire even more reporters as we can gain additional funding. And I know Joan and others here in Clifton Forge are hoping that one day soon we can have one stationed right here. But we also believe that as a local news organization, that we have a civic duty to bring knowledgeable speakers to gatherings such as this. Joan reached out to us in November, asking us to bring the Cardinal News Speaker Series to Clifton Forge and to ask Beth to play a role. Joan had just heard Beth speak about MAT in Roanoke, and she wanted to spread the word. And what she wrote in an email to us was, pretending that the opioid crisis is someone else's problem is something I can't do anymore. She said she had helped a friend clean out her deceased daughter's rented house, and it's a woman that she has known since she was 3. She had a master's degree, she'd been a teacher and a mother, and she was a heroin addict. And now she's dead. Joan wrote, for me, this has been a game changer, and I know there are many, many others in our place who understand this too well. Beth is nationally known. The opioid crisis is a national threat. Let's talk about a way forward, Joan said. So let's. So I'll turn this over now to our Cardinal News editor, Dwayne Yancey, and he's going to introduce our guest and moderate the discussion. And we hope that there'll be plenty of time to take your questions as well. Dwayne?
Thank you. I will start on my far end and work our way here. We have Lee Higginbotham, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Lewis Gale Hospital, Alleghany. We have Ingrid Wallace-Barber, who is the Executive Director for Alleghany Highlands Community Services. We have Ann Gardner, Commonwealth's Attorney for Alleghany County and Covington. And we have Beth. So we will start with Beth, who will talk for a while, and then the others will have their turn, and then we will have questions.
Great. Thanks, Dwayne. Thank you all for coming out, and such a great full house. I think it's almost as many people as we had for the Dope Sick premiere here, which was just a wonderful moment for me. Just about everyone here was an extra in the show. And I just wonder right now, do we have any extras from the show here? You got one? Okay, not as many. But it is a really important issue. And before I start to talk about my new book, which is about solutions to the opioid crisis, I want to just give a nod to what Dwayne and Luann have done in just 16 months. I can hardly believe all that they have created. In the beginning, Dwayne lives in Botetourt, didn't have broadband at home. He was literally filing and editing stories from a lawn chair outside the Fincastle Library. I mean, this is the most dedicated team. Just this week, they announced that one of my former editors, Megan Schnabel, who was one of their first reporters, is going to be the managing editor. And they're just growing so good, and what they're doing is so important. All 4 of my books have grown out of topics that I initially wrote about for the Roanoke Times, where I worked for 25 years. And Dope Sick was my 3rd book. It came out in 2018. And just to set the stage for what I'm going to be talking about tonight, when I first started going out and talking about the opioid crisis, it was 2018. And I would begin by saying, I'm sorry for your loss. I know there are people in the room who have lost folks. I would say last year we lost 72,000 people to this, and that's an undercount. Doesn't count hepatitis C, HIV, endocarditis, all the addiction adjacent things. And it doesn't count all the friends and families. So it's tragedy for so many people. Now I say, last year, just 4 years later, we lost 108,000 people to drug overdose. And every one of them still a tragedy. The big picture as I see it, and really hasn't changed that much since I first started reporting it, although, as Luann said, it is easier to get people to go on the record because so many people have experienced it. But the opioid crisis is really festering and growing still. The numbers are going up every time they count them. And I think of it as the scourge that takes advantage of long-standing fissures in American society. Of the difference between treating a person with an SUD or a substance use disorder as a person with a disease that's treatable, or treating them like a criminal and a moral failure. So I'll talk a little bit about DopeSick first. I'll give you one slide of numbers, and Caleb, if you wouldn't mind putting that next slide on. I told you we had a record 108,000 dead in the last year. When I first wrote the proposal for this book, it was 2015, and I suggested, based on the research, that the opioid epidemic was predicted to peak in 2018, and it hasn't. It has just gotten worse. In Virginia, in 2020, we had a 33% increase in overdose deaths. We lose 4 people a day to this. I'm sure that's an undercount in Virginia. And 3/4 of the deaths are fentanyl related. And drug overdose is the leading cause of unnatural death in Virginia since 2013. I talk a lot about MAT in my new book, and that is the brand name's buprenorphine, brand name is Suboxone, or methadone. These are the 2 gold standard medications for treating OUD, or opioid use disorder. Only about 20% of people with that, though, are able to access MAT, and a lot of that is because of stigma around it. Most rehabs, we all know parents who have remortgaged their house to send their kid to rehab, but most rehabs don't offer the gold standard of care. We wouldn't allow that with diabetes, for instance. We wouldn't say, no, you can't have insulin. 80% of people don't even need inpatient care. That's according to the American Society of Addiction Medicine. They're better off staying in the communities, getting social supports, counseling, and getting on MAT, which is medication-assisted treatment. We now call it medicine for opioid use disorder. We know addiction is a chronic relapsing disease. It takes 4 to 5 treatment episodes over an average of 8 years for a person to get just 1 year of sobriety. And the reason I wrote this follow-up book is because with the opioid litigation funds about to come down, we're already seeing some of the distributor money being going into communities. My concern was that I didn't want the money to be wasted on same old methods of care that weren't working. And so who in the nation, particularly in rural areas, which were hit first and remain hardest hit because of the fewest resources to fight back, who is making an impact? Who are the innovators? Next slide, please. So the first person whose story I really embedded in was a young woman named Tess Henry. She was from a wealthy neighborhood, South Roanoke. Her dad was a surgeon, her mom a hospital nurse. And when I met her in late 2015, she described how she had been overprescribed at an urgent care center. 2 30-day opioids for a case of bronchitis. Yeah. And I said, well, how did you know you were addicted? At the end of the 30 days, she couldn't get any more, and she put her symptoms into Google, and she said, holy crap, I'm addicted. And I basically watched her flip-flop between having access to her MAT and not having it. She had an infant child that she was trying to take care of. The baby got removed. And I just saw her hit barrier after barrier. She had an older sister who had been helped a lot by AA, great program. But at the time, I think it's changed a bit. At the time, they were very stigmatizing of people who were on buprenorphine. And when I would drive her to weekly NA meetings at the start of my following her, and no one would sponsor her. And that felt like daggers to her. So Tess, too, had believed that rehab was her best chance of getting clean. She had been to a couple, and after being on the streets, doing sex work in order to become, to not be dope sick, that's why I called the book. I wanted it to be this in-your-face thing. If people could simply get the concept of avoiding dope sickness, at the end of their journey, they're not doing it to get high. They're doing it so as not to be really sick. And if I could get that across, I knew I would have explained something. But when she got out to Las Vegas, where her grandfather had sent her to rehab, and she quickly failed out of that about 3 weeks in, then she was homeless and doing sex work on the streets of Las Vegas. And so the day after Christmas on 2017, got the phone call that I never wanted to get, which was that she had been murdered on the streets. Her body was found in a dumpster on Christmas Eve. And she wanted, I just want you to know, she wanted so much to get better, to get home to her son, Ronan. Next slide. She would periodically, when she would come home before the rehab, she would check herself into Roanoke Memorial. That's with an abscess bandage on her arm. That Christmas, or that was actually Thanksgiving of 2016, she had prepared the whole extended family's Thanksgiving. She had that abscess thing on her arm. Not one person thanked her for the meal except for her mother. And then she went back on the streets the next day. Next slide. Her mother, Pat, is a nurse at Lewis Gale, is now raising her son, Ronan. He's a couple years older than that now. And I was so distraught, not just at her death, but also just at how many senseless barriers she had faced, that I thought, I never want to write about this again. My husband said, you should write a cookbook. But I didn't write a cookbook. I went out talking about the book, and over the course of traveling around the country for a year or two, working on the show, I started hearing about really good things that were happening, and they were happening in rural areas even. And I thought, as this money's coming down, if I can show examples of these really positive, innovative things, that will help the conversation. And, Mr. Rogers says, find the heroes, right? And so that's what I did for my own particular form of trauma that I had from, really, I've been writing about this since about 2012 when I first wrote about it for the newspaper. Next slide, please. So one of the first things Tess told me, the first time I interviewed her, late 2015, she described how she had been overprescribed on urgent care. And she said, what we need is urgent care for the addicted. Now, she didn't know what that was because she had never had it. I didn't know what it was because I had never seen it. So this is psychiatrist Dr. David Hartman on the right, and his wife, psychologist Dr. Sherry Hartman. They run the outpatient clinic that provides buprenorphine and other SUD treatments for Carilion in Roanoke. Now, when Tess was out in the streets, she couldn't get in with them because they had a long waiting list. Carilion has really stepped up in the aftermath. You saw the bandage on Tess's arm. One of the things they would do at the hospital was they would treat her OD or they would treat her abscess, and they would send her home with a Xerox of AA and NA meetings. Nothing about buprenorphine. These two really stepped up and provided leadership. They have massively expanded their capacity. They talked the emergency department. Emergency Department Director John Burton, first time I interviewed him about why don't we do MAT in the ER? He said, that's not within our purview. That's just treating a drug addiction with another drug. I called him back 2 years later, and I had heard he got all of his docs waivered. They were all doing it. They had 24/7 coverage. So if you go there now, they will screen for substance use disorder. They will get you into the Hartman's outpatient program. And maybe even more importantly, they will hook the person up with a peer. And that is a person in recovery. I call the peers my rowdy angels. They are very much the soul of this new book. These are people who are out working with the least of us in tent encampments under bridges, trying to help people. And I said, Dr. Burton, that's amazing. You've gotten, I think he had 30-some people into treatment in the first month alone. He says, I know, it feels like I'm doing mental cartwheels every day. He was so happy. You can hear his voice. I actually recorded it, and it's in a podcast. And the change in the tone, he suddenly went from being very pessimistic to being optimistic. I said, what changed your mind? He said, well, we read your book. And then we looked at the research, and we said, how can we not be doing this? So that's an example of a person with a lot of power, delving into the research, changing his mind, not just changing his mind, but also, he admitted he had been wrong, which takes a lot of courage. And they're going great guns now. And that is definitely an urgent care that might have helped Tess. At the same time, the Community Service Board also had a big waiting list when she was trying to come home and get into treatment. There was a rule for a moment that you couldn't get in their MAT program unless you tried their counseling first and failed. Well, in an era of fentanyl, which is what's killing 3/4 of the folks that die from OUD, failure is death. So we've got to have what, as Tess called it, urgent care. Next slide, please. So we know that change can be really hard, especially change. These are human problems. There isn't a department of human problems at the Clifton Forum Town Office. This requires people getting out of their silos and really working together, particularly criminal justice and healthcare. So this is a badass healthcare innovator that I met a few years back. She's from rural Kentucky. Some of her first memories are of her friends' parents overdosing at birthday parties, right? She gets out of Kentucky. She gets herself educated. She now has a PhD in hospital administration. And when she landed in Batesville, Indiana, a small town, not unlike Clifton Forge, she challenged the CEO of the hospital and the judges to say, hey, the town just voted the opioid crisis is our most pressing problem. What are we doing for people, particularly when they come out of jail, because that's when they are most likely, 70 times more likely to overdose if they return to use. And they said, well, we have 1 hour of treatment for probationers. And she said, y'all, we got to do better than this. And using research, she designed a program. I followed it for 18 months. I wrote an article for the Atlantic that ran in 2020, following just how she got people to get out of their silos. And it was pretty amazing because the head of probation wasn't so into they called it mamby-pamby jail or coddling inmates, right? Instead of putting somebody back in jail when they return to use, because they haven't been treated while they're in jail, Nikki's folks, these were mostly social workers, psychiatrists. She lured a psychiatrist from Indiana because many rural counties have no psychiatrists. They started enveloping people in care. They had 9 hours of intensive outpatient treatment every week, but it was at night, and they helped you get a job during the day. They got you on MAT if you wanted to be on MAT. They got you signed up for Medicaid. They got everybody in the group was food insecure. They partnered with a food pantry. They partnered with a workforce development. Amazing work. And in 18 months, now this is pre-COVID, things changed in COVID, but in 18 months, in that population, they had 0 overdose deaths. 0. I mean, almost unheard of, right? Next slide, please. So the first time I went, this was a needle exchange in Roanoke run by Virginia Harm Reduction Coalition. The first time I went into there, it was in the old, behind the old Ramada Inn, which has now been torn down on Franklin Road. But I burst into tears. I was like, oh my God, Tess would love this. There were inspirational quotes on the wall. There was a clothes rack in the back. You could get needles, sure, because we know that people who go to needle exchanges are 5 times more likely to eventually enter treatment. But you could also get food. You could get connected to Medicaid. You could get help with housing. And it was just, people brought their dogs. And so that's when I really began to delve into this subject, which is called harm reduction. And so that could be giving somebody fentanyl test strips. It could be giving clean needles. It could also just be giving connections to care. But in the meantime, we know that communities that have needle exchanges, and I know it sounds a little kind of in your face, but what it does is it makes a connection for somebody and they begin to trust, because many of these folks are not in any of our systems of care, save the criminal justice, right? So begin to show them non-judgmental love, if you will, humanity, and things start to get better. I met a guy who ran a needle exchange in Jamestown, New York, and he said he had been a heroin user in New York City in the 90s, and he went into his first needle exchange then, and the person at the front desk said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "I'm hungry." And she gave me a sandwich. And it was a sandwich led him to keep coming back, to eventually get into treatment, went back to school. I mean, he has a master's degree and he runs a CSB type facility now. It's pretty amazing. Next slide, please. This is a wrist of a woman in Hickory, North Carolina. Her name is Reverend Michelle Mathis. She and her wife, Karen Lowe, started in 2009 what they then called the nation's only queer, biracial, faith-based harm reduction group. Say that 5 times. And they started it out of the back of their pickup truck, posing as a food pantry. They actually were delivering food, but they quickly realized, this is 2009, when needle exchange is still illegal in North Carolina, they quickly realized most of the people who came were IV injectors. And so they figured out that if you dump out half of a Nature's Valley granola box, it fits 10 needles really fine. And they put a piece of tape over it so they could tell which boxes they had doctored. And so when North Carolina did pass needle exchange in, I can't remember if it was 16 or 17, they were poised. They now run 3 needle exchanges all over the old furniture belt in North Carolina. And they're connecting people to treatment constantly. They're helping people get jobs, helping with all kinds of needs, including food insecurity. And so they're called Olive Branch Ministries. That is a tattoo that they both have on their arms, and acta non verba, which is Latin, Michelle said, for do shit, don't just talk about it. Next slide, please. So when I first met them, they were on the verge of beginning to offer what they called low barrier MAT. And this is one of their peers. I told you I love the peers. I call them my rowdy angels. This peer, Jessica, on the right. She drives around. She's looking for folks living in situations like this. She's bringing clean needles, bringing food, bringing cat food. There was a cat. One woman had a cat. And when they're ready, she connects them to care. And the woman with the cat in the tent has a house and she's in recovery now. This is a photo I took about a year and a half ago. But when Jess first met Michelle was doing a jail-based education program. She was in shackles. She was in jail. She said, my rap sheet was so long, it cost $10 just to have the whole thing printed out. She goes, I was really good at dealing drugs. And now this is what she's dealing. She's dealing hope. She really is. She's amazing. Next slide, please. This is Tim Nolan. He's a nurse practitioner who works at a federally qualified health center during the day, and at night he volunteers for Olive Branch. He started out passing out needles in truck stop parking lots, and people would know Tim's going to be there at Tuesday. And then it was just like harm reduction in action. he realized that a lot of folks that were coming to get needles had hepatitis C, or they thought they did. So then how would it be if I bring my testing kit next week? And so then he started doing that. Then he started treating them with donated medicines. And then he started doing low barrier buprenorphine. So my new book, Raising Lazarus, begins with Tim meeting a new patient at a McDonald's parking lot next to a dumpster. He's a new patient. He's come in through the needle exchange. He's meeting Tim there after work. And he shows up. He's late. He's high. It's the height of COVID. He's got a broken face mask. And he's crying. And he says, I'm going to die if I don't get off the needle. And Tim says, let's get you some help. So he's going to call in a discount buprenorphine prescription that he's prearranged through his FQHC, but he wants the guy to know two things, his name's Sammy, before he leaves that day. One, you can get better. Most Americans have written this population off, but as story after story illustrate, people really can get better. They think they can't. For the biggest group of substance use disorder folks, 40% say they don't think they can stop using drugs. And so it's largely because they've been stigmatized anytime they've tried. So one, you can get better. And the second thing he tells them is don't disappear. And this is really the crux of harm reduction. Even if you relapse and return to use, 6 days, still come back to our appointment next week. And if you can't come because your car broke down or whatever happened, text me and I'll come to you. And it's amazing how well this works to get people into systems of care. And the need for it is so great because people have been so demoralized in their use. Next slide, please. So Tim said at one point, he goes, you got to come down to the clinic where I work. This is another peer, another rowdy angel, Nicole. And he said, you just got to stand and watch her for a morning. So I did that. That's my notebook in the picture. I just sat there and I watched how she treated people. She is a peer recovery specialist. Normally that person would be in a back room waiting to do counseling with people or help them access services. She chooses to be at the front desk. And this is something I always say to providers. That person at your front desk is the most important person. And what she says is, hi, how can I help you? And so I watched. I'm not going to read it to you because I know I got to wrap up here in a bit. But I watched her just envelop people who would come in and would be just so, hangdog. And, one was living in a tent and she had borrowed a car to get there. And she's now clean. This strategy works. But I think because we're so scared of the heroin epidemic and we think we've been acculturated through decades of drug war thinking and drug war policies to think these people are just bad. But you know what? They're just people. Some of them do bad things. Some of them don't. They're people, many of whom, just like Tess, were initially addicted through no fault of their own. Many of them. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about this program. And I found out the coolest thing tonight downstairs. I met a deputy. There he is. I was like, you guys doing MAT in your jail? He goes, yeah, of course we are. We've been doing MAT in the jail since 2020. I was like, what? This is super cutting edge. They're doing it right here. So this is an example I got of Fairfax. One of the themes of my book is women get shit done, right? So the mothers of the dead, the sisters of the dead. This is Ginny Levitt on the right, lost her brother Christopher back in 2013. Started a harm reduction group in Northern Virginia, paired up with the sheriff, Stacy Kincaid, and now they're doing MAT in the jail. And most importantly, the peers, the Rowdy Angels, go in and every person who is on MAT, if they want to be, they get to be counseled with the peer about that really dangerous moment of when they're getting out and make a plan together. And on the day they get out, one of Ginny's peers picks them up and takes them to their next stage, which they have prearranged together. It's pretty amazing. But guess what? A lot of the deputies didn't want to do it. They said, We're going to give them MAT. A lot of them are in here for illegally selling MAT on the black market. We're going to give them that. And the sheriff said, that's what we're going to do because that's what the research says. And they brought consultants in, and some of them still didn't want to do it. And she had to fire them. That is courage. That's an elected position. The county sheriff is the highest elected law enforcement person in the nation, and they wield a lot of power. So kudos to you guys for getting that through, because that is really a game changer in so many communities. Okay, last slide, I think. Yeah. So I always like to close just by saying the sheriffs learn better from other sheriffs. The ED directors, like Dr. Burton, he's now teaching other ED directors. I'm sure you'll be training other jailers how to change this. And if you know people who are still putting up barriers to care, if a judge doesn't want to allow MAT in their drug court, if an ED that you know doesn't want to do MAT in the ED, it's gotten easier now because Congress passed the MAT Act in December. So now doctors don't have to go through this special waiver to be able to prescribe. And it should really help with this issue, because I'm still shocked by this statistic, but we have an 87% treatment gap in the country. That means in the past year, only 13% have been able to get evidence-based care. I mean, that's appalling. If we had a 13%, that's a big F. So, but what I've noticed is that change happens when people get out of their silos and they start talking to each other, right? And helping each other figure out ways to scale around these barriers that they didn't put up, that have been put up for years, but we've got to start taking these barriers down. I'll close by saying why I titled the book Raising Lazarus. Someone asked if it was a reference to Narcan, which is the overdose, antidote reversal drug. And absolutely, Narcan is essential. I'm so glad you guys were doing the Narcan training downstairs. And by the way, you can get Narcan free at your health department. I'm not sure if they're still going to be there when we're finished. But I got the phrase raising Lazarus when I went to a meeting that Michelle Mathis of the Acta Non Verba Tattoo was called in to help Mount Airy, North Carolina. This is a few years ago. It had the second highest overdose rate in the nation. And you might know that Mount Airy, North Carolina is the home of Mayberry, right? So Andy Griffiths is on the water tower, right? They are serious about their wholesome image. Nobody really wanted to deal with it. And so the first meeting, Michelle was brought in as an expert by the opioid response director to just sort of coach. And they had this community meeting, and people are going to start pitching in, and church volunteers are going to drive people to MAT treatment. Because a lot of people live out in the country and didn't have a ride. And someone said, I think when they overdose, we should let them die and take their organs. And Michelle, who's a minister, stood up and said, y'all, do you know that song, They Will Know We Are Christians by Our Love? I am not feeling the love in this room. And so what she does to try to get Christians to check their blind spots about this, because again, we've all been acculturated in drug war thinking, is she tells the story of Lazarus. And Lazarus was dead. Jesus was 4 days late coming to help his friend. First they wept, right? And then Jesus performed the miracle. He raised Lazarus from the dead. But then he said to the disciples, roll the stone. You've got to roll the stone so Lazarus can come out. And I have a chapter called Stone Rollers. I think we all ought to want to be stone rollers in this. And then Jesus said, bring Lazarus out, unbind him, remove his burial cloths. And what Michelle would then say, if she was here, she would say, it's not the sexiest work. It can be really intense. You might get a little something on you. It's really hard. Really hard. But only by getting close to the ground of this issue can you experience the miracle of raising Lazarus. And I love that story. And so thank you for coming. And I think we're going to have a panel discussion now. But thank you, Luann and Dwayne.
Thank you. Ingrid?
So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ingrid Barber, and I've been the executive director of the Alleghany Highlands Community Services Board for 14 years. When I first started in the CSB, they had very limited services when it came to substance use disorder. And over the years, we have grown a lot of our programs. But before I start, I just feel like I need to connect with the audience and let you all know that you're not alone. Everybody sitting here tonight as they either know somebody or their family member or someone, a friend, has been involved with drug addiction. And it is a disease. It's very close to home, and that's why many of you are here tonight. There's a lot of stigma around that, and people, I think, as the years have progressed and being in the system, people have gotten more comfortable with coming in for treatment. We've always been there in the community, but I think that people have gotten more comfortable because, they learn about what services that we have, or they talk to staff. But they've gotten more comfortable, but we got to get past the stigma. We got to get past the embarrassment. I know family members have called me personally and said, I got this going on, and I just don't know what to do. There are treatment modalities, and all of the 40 CSBs across the state were afforded funding because we know it is a disease. I want to share, I just got back from a conference on National Harbor with Tiffany Bowser. She's our prevention coordinator and prevention supervisor, excuse me. And one of the things that I took a screenshot of, Beth was giving you some census around the opioid addiction. She said 108,000. Well, the real number is number of overdose deaths nationally, 107,622 people. That's nationally. These are the other numbers that are astounding. Over 932,000 have died from drug overdose from 1999 to 2020. That's 932,000 people. And we think about the population of Alleghany County and Covington, just such a small number. And then the other thing that was astounding from the conference was opioid epidemic has cost the U.S. economy $2.5 trillion over the last 4 years. Those are astounding numbers. If I left the conference with anything, those are the things that resonated with me, and the reason why I wanted to come back and make sure that we're still providing treatment here and reaching our community. And, I don't expect people in the community to know what we provide. That's what we're here for. So I'm just going to kind of start with, what do you do? Because I've had people call, what do you do if someone needs help? It could be mental health, substance use disorder, or you may have someone with a developmental disability. But we have services. We're open Monday through Friday. We're the first in the state of Virginia. 2013, I went to another conference and I found out, what can we do about these wait lists and people waiting for services? And they came up with this thing called same-day access or open access. And no one in the state of Virginia was really doing it. I decided we were going to do it in our CSB. So I worked with a consultant, and we got our people trained, and we decided that we weren't going to have people wait anymore. So we have open access from the hours of 11:30 to 3:30, where you can come to our CSB, and we'll have an assessment done, and we have someone to treat you and find out what's going on. You may have to come back for a psychiatrist. I can't get enough psychiatry, but there is someone there between those hours that can assess you. And now we have peers also in our clinic setting, so those peers can meet you in many of our services if you need help. But I want to talk a little bit about what services we have for substance use disorder, and we have a number of those that the community is not aware of. As Beth was just saying, we have intensive outpatient treatment that meets 3 days a week, 3 hours a day. It's pretty intensive treatment where you sit in groups and you talk about your addiction. So that is a pretty robust program. It stays pretty full around here in our community, and we're open to taking people into that setting if they are open to doing it. I will tell you that sometimes it takes several attempts for people to get comfortable or to complete the program. Sometimes people do not. complete the program. But we're never going to close the door on anybody or shut the door on anybody if they need services. We're always available. One of the other things we provide as far as SUD services is medicated assisted treatment. We have a psychiatrist that leads a group on Wednesdays, and we use Suboxone. And that group is pretty full also. If I could be afforded the ability to have another psychiatrist on site, because that's a program that you want to have an on-site psychiatrist for, we'd like to have, another group, but we do offer that to people in the community. We have what we call a motivational enhancement therapy. Those are 4 sessions, 1 day a week, just to give people the motivation to know that, hey, I do have to do something. There's something wrong. I know I have something going on in my life, and where do I get the motivation to do something? It's just a group to talk about it and let them know that they're not alone. There's other people that are struggling with addiction as well. We provide SUD case management, where we have a case manager that reaches out, and they normally will reach out more than 2 or 3 times a month, just checking on people in the community, making sure they have access to services, connecting them with the services that they may have. We have a Smart Recovery peer group that meets on Tuesdays from 11:30 to 4. We have a group that meets at 11:30 and one that meets at 4, and that's peer ran. And, that's just talking to people who have had the same experiences that you've had. And, they don't want to sometimes talk to a clinician or a person like me. They want to talk to someone who has walked a mile in their shoes, and they've been through those things. So that's one of the groups we have. We have relapse prevention groups, a stay and quit that we offer also to people who usually complete the intensive outpatient treatment program. There's individual therapy. We will put people in inpatient placement therapy. Sometimes that outpatient is not for individuals, they need inpatient, so we'll send them to either Boxwood Recovery, the Moore Center. There's lots of regional programs that we have that we can send people to. We are in the CSB seeing a lot of everything. I mean, I know the conversation is about opioids, but we're seeing not only opioids, we're seeing meth, we're seeing heroin, and there's lots of experiences with kids today now with marijuana use. It's become legal, so parents are giving it to kids, and it is the gateway drug for kids. They start with the marijuana, and then they want something stronger. It's just unimaginable. I checked our statistics from last year, and there's a 17% increase of people that we've seen through open access services over this time period last year. So people are coming in for treatment, and we're trying to help people in the community. But we got to normalize the conversations, and we got to understand it as a disease and not judge people, because if people think they're being judged, they're not going to seek the treatment. So if you have someone that you know in the community that's in need of services, just send them to the CSB. We're located at 311 Monroe. We work closely with the drug court, which Ann Gartner's here, our Commonwealth attorney. Many of the individuals in the drug court receive the treatment from us, and we have our coordinator who is a part of the CSB that helps to run the drug court as well. So I could stand here and talk all night because I like to talk to the community. I like to talk to people about what we do. A lot of people don't know what we do, and they say, what is a CSB? But it's behavioral health services, and we are available. And if you need more information, you can follow us on our Facebook page at www.ahcsb.org. That's on our website, and then we have a Facebook page with Alleghany Highlands Community Services. And Tiffany Bowser's here with us tonight. She is our prevention supervisor. We have a Healthy Youth Coalition where we're always seeking members to join in and help us with spreading the word about prevention and the disease. So if you'd like to get involved with that, she would gratefully love to have you with her group. But we're available, and we're here for this community, and we want to combat drug addiction in this community. So give us a call.
Well, thank you. When my wife and I moved to the area, I heard about this series called Dope Sick, and I was going, "What is that?" And so we sat down to watch it, and well, first off, I thought it was pretty cool because Michael Keaton was one of the stars of the show, and he's a fly fisherman, and of course that hit home to me. So figure I better check it out. And you know, it it brought back some memories. I've been in healthcare long enough that I remember the days when at the time it was referred to as the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations. But I remember when the Joint Commission came out with their pain management standards. And nothing gets the attention of a hospital administrator or anyone in healthcare as your accrediting body telling you what to do, because for hospitals, our participation in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is how we get paid, they do regulate us being accredited to the Joint Commission. And so when these standards came out, it was something that, of course, caught our attention at the time. And in one of the scenes in the movie, or in the series, excuse me, there was this little snippet where this provider holds up this pain scale and these 10 faces are on it. And it brought back some memories because I remember, putting those up around, hospitals that I was working at the time. And so I recognize, the role that hospitals and healthcare organizations have played in this issue. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about or what I wanted to share tonight, I thought I would really focus in on some of the things that we're trying to do to fix some of that, which is obviously part of what was in Raising Lazarus, and how we can play a role that's a little bit different, if you will. And one of the things, so I work here at Lewis Gale Hospital, Alleghany, and we're part of HCA Healthcare, which is actually the largest hospital corporation here in the U.S. And what comes with that is some scope and scale and some best practices and lessons learned from elsewhere. And so one of the things that we started a few years ago is something called Enhanced Surgical Recovery Program, or ESR for short. And this is a program that emphasizes the use of opioid-sparing analgesia to give our patients the best outcomes. And so 90% of our surgical patients go through this program, and it's really reducing the use of opioids as much as we can. One of the other programs, as I mentioned, we're part of HCA Healthcare, and so this is very interesting, and there was the creation of a program called ALTO. It's the Alternatives to Opioids program that we use in our emergency departments. And this program was actually created here at Lewis Gale Hospital, Alleghany. We had an individual in our leadership team who had been impacted in her life, not just with one individual in her family, but her father, her husband, and her son. And what this is an approach we use in the ED to help with pain management and individuals who present with pain management issues. And it's trying to use effective non-opioid approaches with patients who have common painful conditions that come to the ED. And so it's a multimodal non-opioid approach. And it's really a first-line therapy is how we use it, and educate our patients that opioids are really the second line of treatment that we'll use. But opioids can be used as a rescue medication. But we also sit down and discuss the realistic pain management goals that this person should have, and also discuss addiction potential and the side effects of these opioids. And so this is a program that was created here and is used across our hospitals and our company. And some of the initial results early on in this is we actually had a 37% reduction in the use of IV and PO opioids in our emergency departments. One of the other things that we have in all of our hospitals and here alike, and this was started over a decade ago, is what we call a medication diversion team, or MDT for short. And this is really an effort to foster this culture of supporting safe and effective patient care and healthy work environment. And I'm sure many of you have heard of stories of providers or individuals that have become addicted, and to feed that addiction, they divert drugs. They're healthcare workers, and they divert medications to feed their addictions, and many of it is opioid based as well. So this is a program, and we meet on a monthly basis, and it's very, very structured, and we have templates and tracking sources, and so we sort of monitor the selection of particular drugs that are used in the hospital, access, secure storage, preparing and dispensing and stocking and administration and so forth. I was at a meeting a number of years ago, and this gentleman was speaking, and he actually was a anesthesiologist by training, and he talked about his story, but he shared an interesting fact. He said, I can walk into any hospital in this country and I can tell you within 15 minutes whether or not I could divert from this organization. And that one kind of struck me as, wow, is it really that easy? And he talked through that a little bit, and so we have this program in place, and it's designed to prevent any type of diversion that could occur at a hospital. One of the other things that we do, and when we partner with our local law enforcement, is an annual Crush the Crisis event, and this is a program that is focused on removing unwanted medications from medicine cabinets in our homes, and getting these high risk drugs out of the reach of those that might want to use them in the ways that they weren't designed. And so it's getting thousands of pounds of medications off of the shelves, if you will. And most recently, the campaign that we did here and across Virginia, so HCA, we actually were able to take up and collect over 3,000 pounds of medications and disposed of properly. We also participate, and we're required to, but we participate in the Virginia's prescription monitoring program, which is a real-time kind of central database containing information to help providers to better inform treatment or to be better informed in their treatment decisions. So I was in Kentucky at the time when these programs rolled out, and Kentucky was one of the leading states to create these programs, and so it's come a long way. It's not a perfect system, but it's come a long way. And I'll just close. There's lots of other things that we do, but I would just share and echo some of the comments from others. Is removing the stigma and removing the normalizing our folks who have these addictions, and treating them as was said, as humans, and showing some humanity as we, help them in their path, hopefully, in their journey to recovery, and hopefully playing a role in that process that's positive and not negative. And so just wanted to share those few comments. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ann Gardner, Alleghany County Commonwealth's attorney. Along with 4 assistant prosecutors, I represent the citizens of Alleghany County, Covington, Clifton Forge, and Iron Gate in criminal cases. We work closely with state and local law enforcement agencies to address crime in our community with a focus on public safety. In roughly 30 years as a prosecutor, I have witnessed the impact of drugs on our criminal justice system, contributing to homicide, other violent crime, DUIs, DUI maimings, DUI manslaughters, larceny, embezzlement, burglary, you name it. Prior to coming to Alleghany in 2005, I was an assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Roanoke City, where we operated one of the first drug courts in Virginia. And contrary to the notion of mass incarceration for drug users, the laws in the courts have evolved over the years so that they provide many treatment-based alternatives to incarceration. I can't name them all, but just for some examples, under Virginia law, first-time offenders charged with possession of certain controlled substances are eligible to have their cases taken under advisement and ultimately dismissed if they successfully complete probation and the treatment that comes with it. And one of the caveats to that statute is that the offenders are required to make a reasonable effort to find employment. So it's a positive alternative. Virginia's safe reporting of overdoses law protects those who report an overdose so that they themselves are not subject to arrest and prosecution for some sort of a drug-related offense or an alcohol-related offense. The Virginia sentencing guidelines often, really more often than not, recommend no incarceration for simple possession crimes. Instead, it recommends usually probation. So the offender will be put on probation usually for approximately 2 years, and through the probation office they receive services, they receive treatment, they receive drug assessments, and many other things. And once they complete that, then their criminal charge is dismissed. So that is an incentive for them to get the treatment that they need. The Virginia Department of Corrections offers probationers an intensive residential treatment program through its CCAP. We call it CCAP. It's the Community Corrections Alternative Program. It's 22 to 48 weeks. It's inpatient, it's intensive, but through that program, they address all sorts of issues. They get treatment, they get drug assessments, they receive education, they receive vocational training, and community-based employment is part of that as well. I don't do CCAP, so I can't go into everything, but it's an intensive program that is offered through the Department of Corrections. Alleghany County, like most areas, has been impacted by the use and sale of illicit drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, and many others, as you've heard tonight, are contributed to overdose deaths and they're fueling crime. Recently, we've had a number of defendants who have died from drug overdoses while they were out on bond waiting for their cases to come to court. I have to go and I do an order to have the case dismissed because they're no longer with us. So we see it all the time. DUI drug offenses are very common, and they often result in accidents, injuries, and sometimes death. Law enforcement officers are risking their lives when dealers flee and resort to violence to avoid apprehension. Often what should have been a routine traffic stop has turned deadly. One afternoon, less than a year ago, our community suffered a tragic loss when 3 people were killed, one Covington police officer in the line of duty during a shooting that was drug-fueled at a local business. In the summer of 2019, after I was approached by several citizens asking about the idea of a drug court, I decided to call Anna Powers with the Virginia Supreme Court. She heads it up down there. So I called Anna and scheduled a meeting here. We had it at the county government complex. We invited judges, prosecutors, government officials, sheriffs, police chiefs, from not just Alleghany, but from surrounding counties, multiple counties. We had the room pretty much full, and Anna Powers came to Alleghany from the Supreme Court to tell us how to do this, to tell us how to create a drug court. And with the support of our circuit court judge, the sheriff, the police chiefs, the government officials, all the people I just named, the Alleghany Covington Drug Court began. Our drug court was approved by the Virginia Supreme Court and began operation in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which didn't make anything any easier. And as a result of our initial meeting, Botetourt and Craig counties began working on a combined drug court at the same time. We currently have 21 participants in our program. The Botetourt-Craig drug court program has been operating for around a year, maybe a little over a year. They have 7 participants at this point. Drug court is considered a special court under Virginia law, and it's overseen by the Virginia Supreme Court. Participants must have or need to have criminal charges or a charge pending. They need to be screened to go into drug court and found to be eligible. And anyone convicted of a violent felony within the preceding 10 years is not eligible by code. And after pleading guilty in circuit court to their charges, the final disposition of those charges is deferred, and the participant enters into the drug court program, which has 5 phases. And during the 5 phases of the program, services are offered to the participants by the Community Services Board, by probation. Some of the things that they do, and Ingrid could go into it more than I can because I'm not the treatment part, but it's not just drug treatment, it's not just drug assessments, it's more than that. They help these folks find homes, they subsidize things, they help them find jobs, they help them get their driver's license back. If that's one of their problems, that they don't have a driver's license and they can't go find a job. So a lot of services are offered through the drug court. Every Tuesday, our team meets at the courthouse, and we review the progress for each participant. After court convenes after our meeting so that the judge can address each participant individually in open court. So as with any program, we've had some failures and we've had some successes. There's no magic pill, but if we can save a life, then it's all worth it. We've several participants who are nearing graduation. Hopefully we've helped some folks. I see some folks here from drug court tonight, and I'm really glad to see that. I was walking through the Walmart parking lot the other day, and I heard someone hollering. And so I turned to look, and I saw one of our drug court participants waving and smiling at me, and he said, "Hey, we're closing on our house in 2 weeks." And I said, "That's great. Bring us a picture." He's come a long way, and it was really cool to hear that. So those are the kinds of things that we're hoping we can make happen, the positive change that we're hoping we can accomplish through drug court and through the criminal justice system. We have a lot of things at play that we're trying to do, but drug court has been hopefully one of the best, and I hope that it has a good future. Thank you.
All right, well, now it's your turn. we will take questions. We've got microphones down front, so I think the protocol is if you have a question, come on down.
Someone was talking about it being a disease. So alcoholism is a disease, but abstinence from alcohol and a 12-step program is what helps those people get better. So I guess I'm just trying to understand why we would take the opioids that the pharmaceutical companies are now paying out to the states large amounts of money that we have never seen before. And like, okay, so what are we gonna do? I just don't understand why we would take more drugs to
I get it. It's
support the pharmaceutical companies
Right.
again,
It's
and they're the ones
ironic.
that put us in this frickin' mess.
I get you. I hear you. I totally hear you. And it is ironic. And yet, if you're a person with diabetes and you have to take insulin, you wouldn't say, sorry, you can't do it because we don't think that's right. So it really, if you think about it, opioid use disorder, not alcohol use disorder, which it works on a different part of the brain, is uniquely helped by these medications. And I can send you, it's all over the footnotes of Raising Lazarus. Study after study says better outcomes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just have kind of a comment about why I use MAT. I used every day for 11 years. And I overdosed twice. I've lost 5 people in the past year. And we all tried to quit without MAT, and we couldn't do it. Like, if you haven't experienced dope sickness, you don't have any idea what it's like. I used to be a social worker. I used to have a career and a life. And I went from that to being homeless on the streets in Las Vegas. Like, and now, because of MAT, I've got 30 days clean. So, just a comment, so why use MAT? Because it freaking works. It saved my life, literally saved my life. Without it, I don't think I'd be alive. So, that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
I have a comment and then a question. My mother, at age 88, was dope sick. And methadone, she's 92 now, and methadone was the difference. She went to thanks to a hospital, my mother, who was in a nursing home, went to a treatment program. And my mom is pain-free, because methadone works on that too. But my mom is pain-free for the first time, I don't know, since she was 40, 45 years old. So drop the stigma. My 88-year-old mother was an addict, is in recovery. My question is, and I suppose it's to all of you, but Beth, I'm thinking of you in particular. You gave one example of a pastor in a congregation or with the tattoos. Do you have any experience of faith communities who are being helpful? Like if I wish there was another chair for the faith community spokesperson. So I'm just curious what your experience of that is. The church has a reputation for being more judgmental than accepting, you know.
I was giving a talk in December in Roanoke, and 2 people that heard what I had to say about harm reduction. One was a minister, a Brethren minister. She said, I want to start a needle exchange in my church parking lot. I was like, whoa, okay. Here, call this person. I don't know if she's doing that, but the next week she sent me a picture. She was packing Narcan kits at the harm reduction center. Another woman in the audience was a retired physician who's now doing wound care at the harm reduction, both volunteers. Michelle's faith-based, there is a faith-based harm reduction coalition. It's nationwide. That would be a great place to get resources. And Danny Clausen at the Virginia Harm Reduction Coalition would be glad to help anybody who wanted to get started. I mean, it just takes, there was a church, Windsor Hills United Methodist, did an 8-week study session using DopeSick as a text. And every week they brought in a new person from Roanoke's Coalition to talk to people. And, they were already doing AA meetings and things like that, but they stepped it up. And I think that's what we all have to do. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, go ahead. What, is there anybody here from Good News Church? Yeah, so if you don't know about what they do, please look them up because they're doing fantastic work in this area as well.
And I just wanted to say we work closely with Good News Church, Fincastle Baptist Church. They've let us in to have many events. We've had educational events there as well. Loving Life Ministries, for those of you who may or may not be aware, I'm working with Shorty Wolf and Tammy right now to expand peer services. We're going to do a drop-in center. We wrote a grant so we can have more peer expansion here in the community. And we're working on getting the curriculums and getting the peer drop-in center up to speed. But we wrote a grant and we're going to use our space. They've been gracious enough for us to use the space, but in addition, they're going to help us so we can grow our peer network here in the community. So yes, the CSBs are heavily dependent on the faith-based community. The faith-based community helps us a lot with food pantries and people getting what they need for those that are in services with us. They're always we work with, I think, God's Covering for a while. They were doing like lunches and things for families. So we work with all of the faith-based community here locally.
I just wanted to thank that young lady for sharing, especially because that's not easy and that's important. My name's Lauren. I'm from the coal fields of Southwest Virginia, where it all began. And I partly would like to just invite the Cardinal News people to get the same thing down in Wise County, which we really need to get a group of people together. I work at a homeless shelter. I'd say probably 90% of the people that come through there are because of substance use disorder, domestic violence, as our prosecutor mentioned all the crimes involved. It's very, very difficult. I work with a lot of them personally. But in Norton, Virginia, where the shelter currently is, we had somebody OD on purpose in the shelter. So we called 911. That's the thing to do, right? We were waiting for them to come with the Narcan, and they didn't have Narcan. That blew my mind that they don't carry it. And I thought, I think we need to have some conversation going down there to help people because it's a very big issue. But I really would like to invite you. And we are getting ready to expand to quadruple our efforts. We already have about 40 residents there. So it's going to be a big operation there. And so I'd really like to work with, some real plan on how to get the funding to the right place, like Beth, you mentioned. And there's got to be some specific ideas. I know peer-to-peer is really, really important. So it's kind of a broad subject, but an invitation.
Thank you.
I'm super passionate about prevention, as Ingrid was sharing, but I just wanted to give some ideas to the community members. She did mention the coalition, but as a community member, sometimes you don't really know how you can help if you're not directly either related to or associated with an individual that's struggling. And she mentioned the transportation piece. That is huge. If you can ever volunteer, if you know someone that's struggling, to bring them to a meeting or take them to the grocery store or we are very spoiled that we all drove here this evening, and it's not a big deal for us to hop in the car and go to Roanoke for a doctor's appointment or travel to Beckley. And for the individuals that are struggling, sometimes that is a huge barrier to them getting treatment, is that they don't have the funds and they don't have the money to be able to get from point A to point B. And so if we can take away some of those things that we take for granted, that would just be huge for them. And our community, we're really lucky to have the radar bus. And for a long time, the radar bus was at a discounted rate due to COVID and different things like that. So as a community, if you can support the radar bus and make donations or anything like that would be beneficial to helping these individuals get to the treatment, because sometimes they want it. It's just a matter of getting there. And so, and we need to be supportive, don't question, the why and the how, but just if we can just make it work for them. We see it every day. And it is to me, it is a privilege to be able to work with individuals that are struggling, and they overcome it with so many things working against them. And again, I thank you and your family for coming, because it's huge and it makes a difference to see someone and not just, it to be intangible, So I appreciate you very much.
Hello. I'm recovering alcoholic drug addict, long time, 32 years. I've worked with a lot of people over the years, alcoholic, just addict, dual addicted. And up until now, methadone, Suboxone kind of, it was real standoffish for me. I've witnessed a lot of miracles in the last 30 days. And I'm convinced, but the one thing I don't, it's still like a black hole for me, is life after MAT. I haven't heard much about that.
And I'll hear people who will be criticizing it. They'll say, well, they want you to stay on it for years. And absolutely, they haven't figured out how long. It's individual. Some people might have to be on it for the rest of their lives. Dr. Van Zee, who works with Sister Beth that we were just talking about, been doing buprenorphine treatments since the early 2000s. He has patients that have gone from 16 milligrams to 0.5, and they still don't want to come off, and he doesn't want them to come off until they're ready, because even if you're on that small a dose, it can be triggering to come off of it. And one researcher that I interviewed said he thought people should be on MAT for twice as long as they were on the illicit drugs to begin with. So science is still working all that out. We just know that.
That's the part I don't hear much about. So just
Yeah.
know that there is conversation and they're looking at that.
Absolutely. But there's so much stigma about it.
Sure.
And thank you so much for sharing that story. That was the most powerful thing we heard tonight.
Want to help, right? We want to help.
Yeah.
Just because I'm in AA or I go to NA, I don't shun. I tell them, I tell everybody, I was bottom of the barrel. That's what we do. We deal with bottom of the barrel here.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know what to do in those cases. And
Yeah.
that's the looking ahead and trying to find something.
Right. And I think the idea of expanding the peer services is so important. In Mount Airy, that town that I followed in the new book, I followed it for 3 years. They start out, let them die and take their organs. They now have a staff of 12 peers that's run out of, they have one of these giant old county administration buildings with a whole bunch of empty offices. They dedicated the whole basement. They have 12 peers. They got a Bureau of Justice grant. They have 5 drivers. So you just have to call the day before. They'll take you to any appointment. If it's at first they were like, we don't want to be a concierge service, but a week later I called and he's like, yeah, we'll take people to work afterwards. We'll let them stop and buy diapers, and the world didn't end. So I think a lot of it is about how do we put humanity back into our institutions. In Mount Airy, they respond to every single overdose, and they will call and they will call and they will call. A peer will call you until you pick up the phone. And one woman called 40 times, and the person finally picked up and said, I guess you do care. And that's what it's going to take. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shorty Wolf, and he asked about the spiritual side of it. I run a 12-step program, me and my wife, down at 420 Ridgeway. I'm going to do a little advertising. It's a biblically based 12-step program out of Rick Warren's church out of California. He wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. He had 10,000 people in his church. 7,000 of them went through this program. And I probably got more experience than most people in here with drugs. 46 years. 23 years active. March of 20 will be 23 years I've been sober. 1980 is the first time I stuck a needle in my arm. It was methamphetamine. We were paying $250 to $300 an 8-ball. For you people who don't know what an 8-ball is, it's 1/8 of an ounce. Today, it's $100. What's that tell me? The market's flooded. There's more methamphetamine, fentanyl, and it just really bothers me that why is it flooded? Why is the market flooded? It seems to be getting here a whole lot easier. And we had, I seen in the paper, we had a fellow who got busted in Roanoke with pounds of fentanyl, enough to kill all Roanoke, and guns, and they let him out on a $10,000 bond. What's wrong with the system? What's wrong with the system?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Keisha Jordan. I'm the Youth Mentor Coordinator for TAP, which also, if y'all know, is Total Action for Progress. I service children from 10 to 17 with the opioid crisis. And like Ingrid said, it is hard to get into the school system. But if everybody would drop this stigma, like she said, and everyone else is here, there is an issue. And I see kids firsthand that see their parents, their grandparents, or anyone in their family that suffers from the opioid addiction. I have some mentors here tonight that works one-on-one, and it's always like a 24-hour job. So also with TAP, we have we have 2 re-entry programs. We have Second Chance and Virginia Cares. We also help our clients with trying to find a career, jobs, or whatever, but it's just so hard for us to either provide the service. Everybody is quiet, everybody's either embarrassed, but for us or TAP, how can we also help the community?
Anyone else?
This isn't so much a question, just a testament. My dad, I had no idea, spent most of his life struggling with addiction. And in 2018, he was one of the first 3 graduates of the Montgomery County Drug Court program, and went on to work as a peer recovery specialist. And he just celebrated his year anniversary working as a lead peer recovery specialist coordinator for the Richmond Behavioral Health Authority. So that's just a testament to the peer recovery program. It's just really important and really great, and totally changed my life and my perspective on all of it. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for the work that you do in the community, because it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you.